The camera opens in silence. No battlefields, no shouting officers, only the faint hiss of wind through a broken window and a single metallic sound, shichik. A bolt slides and locks into place, echoing faintly against the walls of a dismantled workshop. The man holding it is a former Japanese armorer, Sergeant Masaru Endo, once responsible for the final inspection of Type 99 rifles in Nagoya. His uniform is gone, replaced by a worn khaki shirt, sleeves rolled, palms darkened by grease and time. He holds the American M1 Garand bolt like a relic. His lips move almost imperceptibly. It's simplicity that never breaks. That sentence will hang there for the rest of the film. The year is 1946. The location, Camp McCoy, Wisconsin. Rows of barracks stretch under the pale winter sky. Inside one of them, the smell of oil and wood mingles with the faint aroma of instant coffee that American guards sip near the doorway. A group of Japanese POWs have been allowed to examine captured American weapons for technical study. What began as a privilege becomes a revelation. The men had expected complexity, secret mechanisms, maybe a hidden trick that made the American rifle so reliable in the mud of Saipan or the cold of Okinawa. Instead, what they found was the opposite. A design so pure that it stripped away everything unnecessary. Masaru's assistant, Corporal Takeda, notes in his small diary, "It feels wrong to admire the enemy's craft, but the more I see, the more I understand. This is how they won." The camera pans to the bolt, lying disassembled on a wooden table. Light reflects along its clean lines. Each surface seems to serve one purpose only. No ornamental machining, no fragile threading, just strength and ease of repair. Masaru turns it slowly, tracing its simplicity with the same reverence he once reserved for his own rifle's polished components. Behind him, another prisoner murmurs, "Our bolt's seized in sand. This one, no matter the dirt, it moves." Outside, the distant whistle of a train passes through the camp. The men lift their heads for a moment, reminded that life beyond the fence continues. The silence that follows is heavy, almost sacred. In that silence, one can hear the clash between pride and respect, between defeat and curiosity. For years, these men had lived inside machines, building, maintaining, perfecting, yet never questioning the philosophy behind them. Now, with bare hands and stripped steel, they are beginning to understand that simplicity isn't weakness. It's mastery refined to its quietest form. Between the cold click of metal and the warmth of understanding, there lies the first step to peace. If you value stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps preserve forgotten chapters of history. And as you watch, share your location and your time right now. Somewhere across the world, another viewer is hearing the same click of that bolt, the same silence that once transformed enemies into learners. Inside the camp workshop, the air hums faintly with the smell of metal filings and oil. American guards lean against the wall, half curious, half indifferent, watching as Japanese engineers crouch over a stripped rifle, laid open like an anatomy lesson. Sergeant Endo's hands move slowly, separating each piece of the Garand bolt, placing them in order across the wooden table. Around him, others take notes, sketch diagrams, whisper calculations under their breath. But beneath the technical language, there is something deeper, reverence. Takeda, the young corporal with wire-rimmed glasses, writes in his diary, "It is just a bolt, yet it locks the power of 1,000 men. When it fails, 1,000 die." The bolt mechanism, when viewed in cross-section, seems almost insultingly simple. 2 locking lugs, a firing pin, a cam groove that translates rotation into strength. No fancy finish, no redundant parts. Every motion is reduced to what must move, and nothing else. When Masaru rotates it, the metal clicks into alignment like a thought made visible. The other engineers nod slowly. They understand. Back home, Japan's Type 99 rifle had demanded patience from the factory floor. Tight tolerances, hand-fitting, inspections so strict that production crawled. Between 1939 and 1945, Japan produced about 3.5 million rifles, less than half of what the United States rolled out in the same period. One wrong angle on the locking lug, and the chamber would jam. One flawed spring, and a soldier's life would end before the enemy appeared. Here in the Wisconsin workshop, surrounded by the cold breath of an American winter, that reality sharpens like a blade. The Americans, they realize, had not built for elegance, they had built for survival. The M1 bolt was not designed to impress an inspector. It was designed to work, again and again, in mud, snow, salt, or blood. A veteran mechanic named Nakamura murmurs softly, "Our bolts were proud, theirs were humble, but the humble ones survived." The camera pans to his hands, one finger missing, lost in a factory explosion in 1944. He picks up the bolt, runs his thumb over its smooth curve. A moment passes, a moment of respect not for the enemy, but for the craft that spared so many lives through function rather than glory. In war, victory hides not in grand strategies or thunderous guns, but in the quiet perfection of things unseen. A single turn of steel, a spring that never slips. Those are the details that decide the fates of armies. Outside, snow drifts begin to fall, soft against the wire fence. The camera lingers on the bolt lying open on the table, glinting faintly in the weak sunlight. Small, silent, and unbreakable. The following morning, the workshop buzzes again, but the mood has changed. What began as a mechanical study has become a kind of ritual. The Japanese engineers gather not as prisoners now, but as students. The guards notice the shift, their eyes no longer guarded with resentment, but curious, alive. At one corner of the table sits Lieutenant Hiroshi Matsuda, formerly a weapons designer for the Nakajima Aircraft Company. His hands once drew the blueprints for machine gun synchronization gears used in the Ki-43 fighter planes. Now those same fingers trace the contours of the American bolt assembly diagram handed out by an American sergeant. The sergeant, named James Caldwell, has worked on the M1 production line in Springfield, Massachusetts before the war. His English is slow, his gestures careful, but his teaching is patient. Through broken words and drawings on scrap paper, Matsuda begins to see another world. He notices how every American component carries a serial number that can fit any other rifle of its kind. A miracle of interchangeability. Back home, Japanese parts had to be hand-matched, inspected, and signed. If one broke, the gun became useless until a new one was crafted. He remembers the faces of young soldiers at Rabaul, wiping mud from jammed bolts during firefights. He remembers a letter sent to his wife in 1943. "They blame our guns. I designed them, and I know they are right." Now, under the cold Wisconsin light, the truth he had avoided stands clear before him. America's strength was not genius. It was system. Simplicity scaled, multiplied, repeated. Around him, the engineers whisper comparisons. Someone mentions the American car factories in Detroit, where engines rolled out like bread from an oven. Another speaks of the Boeing plant producing bombers every hour. They begin to understand how the same logic that made a rifle reliable also built an empire of production. Matsuda lifts the bolt once more. He looks at Caldwell and says haltingly, "Simple, but strong." Caldwell nods and replies, "That's the point, friend." The word friend lands softly, foreign yet human. Inside a barbed wire camp, the defeated studied the victors, not to imitate, but to comprehend. For the first time, the men who built for conquest began to build for understanding. That night, back in the barracks, the men sit quietly, speaking little. The sound of the bolt's metallic click echoes faintly as someone tests it under the dim bulb. A small sound, but it carries across the barrack, through the fences, through the snow. Sometimes, the smallest click can mark the beginning of change. By spring 1946, the snow had melted across Wisconsin, and the U.S. military began granting select Japanese POWs permission to visit American industrial sites. For men like Lieutenant Matsuda and Sergeant Endo, the news spread like rumor, the kind whispered across bunks at night, part disbelief, part hope. They were to be taken to the Rock Island Arsenal, Illinois, one of America's oldest and most efficient weapons factories. The journey itself felt surreal. From the camp gates to the train platform, through fields now turning green, the men gazed out the windows in silence. American soldiers sat nearby, relaxed, reading magazines, chewing gum. In another life, these two groups would have been mortal enemies. Now they shared the same air, the same view of a land that never seemed to stop moving. When the train slowed before the massive brick walls of Rock Island, the visitors fell silent again. The facility stretched for miles, warehouses, smokestacks, and assembly lines humming like an enormous heartbeat. Inside, the Japanese engineers were greeted by foremen in denim jackets, women in kerchiefs operating machines, and mechanics guiding bolts, triggers, and barrels along conveyor lines that moved as smoothly as a river. Masaru Endo stood still for several seconds, unable to speak. He had spent half his life working in factories where machines stopped every hour, workers inspected by superiors, and shortages were constant. Here, no one shouted, no one waited for parts. The rhythm was effortless, each worker performing a motion so simple it looked like second nature. The foreman, an older man with grease-stained gloves, lifted a freshly milled bolt and handed it to him. 18 seconds, he said proudly, from blank to finished. Endo blinked. Back in Nagoya, the same process could take 3 minutes if the machines didn't jam. His mind ran the numbers. If each station produced one every 18 seconds, that was 200 an hour, 1,200 a shift, over 100,000 bolts a month from a single line. He realized, in that moment, how a nation had built not through miracles, but through repeatable, perfect simplicity. Takeda whispered, almost in awe, "They do not build weapons, they build systems." Later, in a small office above the line, Matsuda examined American blueprints. Each line was thick, bold, meant for clarity rather than beauty. He smiled faintly. The difference was spiritual. Japan's designs glorified mastery, America's glorified efficiency. As they left the factory, the group paused before a massive storage hall where rows of rifles gleamed beneath hanging lamps. A single shaft of sunlight filtered through the roof and landed across one bolt assembly. Endo stared, transfixed, until the guard gently said it was time to go. When the defeated crossed into the heart of their conqueror's machines, they found no arrogance, only rhythm. And in that rhythm, they heard the quiet secret of endurance, that the strongest designs are those that make even failure simple. Night settles over Camp McCoy. The barracks are dim, except for a single hanging bulb swaying gently in the draft. Beneath its light, the day's discoveries ferment into words and tension. The small wooden table that once held blueprints is now the center of debate. Half-finished mugs of weak coffee tremble with the rhythm of raised voices. Nakamura, the older mechanic missing a finger, slams his hand on the table. "We didn't lose because of machines," he growls in Japanese. "We lost because our spirit was corrupted." His eyes are fierce, yet tired. The same eyes that had once believed in the divine wind. Matsuda, sitting across from him, shakes his head. "No, Nakamura-san. We lost because we made everything too beautiful to survive." His tone is not bitter, only weary. "We built weapons that demanded perfection from imperfect men. They built ones that forgave mistakes." The air tightens. Someone coughs near the stove. Sergeant Endo finally speaks softly. "We tried to prove genius. They tried to prove reliability. Only one of those wins wars." For a while, no one responds. Outside, snowmelt drips from the roof, tapping rhythmically against the mud. Then Takeda opens his small notebook. He reads aloud from what he has written. "I used to think small flaws were dishonor. Now I think dishonor is not learning." His words silence the room. An American guard at the door, not understanding Japanese, senses the emotion anyway. He glances at them. Men who, months ago, would have fought to the death. Now they look like colleagues arguing in a workshop. The camera lingers on the bolt lying in the center of the table, light reflecting off its metal like a mirror of their thoughts. Around it, war and pride dissolve into something quieter, understanding. The narrator's tone deepens. In that barrack, defeat stopped being shame and became education. Every click of the bolt was no longer a memory of loss, but a question. What if simplicity itself was the truest form of strength? One prisoner laughs softly. "Imagine," he says, "if our rifles had worked as easily as theirs. How many sons would have come home?" Silence again. That sentence hangs in the smoky air, heavier than any gun. What do you think lasts longer, pride or understanding? Another follows, slower. If you had to choose between making something perfect or something that endures, Which would you build? The bulb flickers. The men lie down one by one. The bolt remains on the table, cool and untouched, gleaming faintly in the half-dark. The night's final witness to transformation. By 1947, the gates of Camp McCoy opened for the last time. The war was long over, and America had begun returning Japanese prisoners to their homeland. One by one, the men stepped onto transport trucks under a pale morning sky, carrying few belongings, a blanket, a notebook, sometimes a photograph. But among them, Sergeant Endo carried something else. A small, wrapped piece of steel. The same bolt he had studied for months, a quiet souvenir of revelation. On the long voyage back across the Pacific, the men gathered on deck, watching the horizon fade into endless gray. The ocean, calm and indifferent, seemed to erase everything that had once defined them: rank, uniform, pride. Masuda leaned against the railing, writing a letter to his wife in Osaka. I have learned more from defeat than I ever did from victory. The Americans build not for glory, but for time. We worshipped perfection, and in doing so, forgot mercy. When the ship docked at Uraga Harbor, Japan felt different, smaller, quieter, still scarred by bombed factories and hollow-eyed children. The returning prisoners were met with suspicion, even shame. Some neighbors whispered, "Traitor." Others simply turned away. But inside their homes at night, they wrote. Endo's first letter to his former factory supervisor read, "The bolt that never breaks is not a myth. It exists because it chooses function over pride. We must build like that now, not for war, but for life." He later found work at a small machine shop near Nagoya, fixing looms for textile mills. The same hands that once fitted rifle parts now repaired machines that clothed a generation. In quiet moments, he would open his drawer, take out the bolt, and turn it slowly between his fingers. Its click had changed meaning. Once a sound of power, now a rhythm of peace. Matsuda joined a post-war technical institute, teaching young apprentices about design principles. On the first day of class, he placed the drawing of the M1 bolt beside Japan's Type 99 schematic. "Look at the difference," he told them. "One is art, the other is survival. You must learn the art of surviving." His students listened in silence. Some had lost fathers in the war. Some wore American shoes from surplus stores. For them, the line between enemy and teacher had already blurred. Through letters and lessons, through metal and memory, they began rebuilding not machines, but meaning. War had taught them the cruel cost of over-design. Peace would teach them the grace of enough. One more question to the audience lingers before the fade-out. Have you ever held something simple and only then realized how much wisdom it carries? The sound of steel turning echoes once, light and final. 2 decades later, the city of Tokyo hums with the sound of rebirth. It is 1965. Factories roar again, trains gleam with polished steel, and Japanese industry, once shattered, has risen from the ruins with quiet precision. Among the crowds walking through the Tokyo National Museum of Science and Industry, an old man stands still before a glass display case. His name tag reads, Masaru Endo, retired engineer, Nagoya Machinery Cooperative. Inside the case lies an M1 Garand rifle, its bolt slightly angled under the light. A small plaque reads, Standard U.S. Infantry Rifle, 1936 to 1945, known for its durability and simple locking mechanism. Endo's reflection merges with the glass. He reaches out, stopping just short of touching it. Around him, visitors move past. Students, businessmen, tourists. None pause long. But for him, that bolt is no longer a relic. It is the teacher he never had, the silent answer to the questions that haunted him for years. He remembers the smell of oil and snow at Camp McCoy, the laughter of American guards, the faces of Matsuda and Takeda. He hears again that faint metallic click that once broke the silence of defeat. He remembers the moment he whispered, "It's simplicity that never breaks." And now, standing in a Japan reborn through industry, he finally understands that the same lesson had carried his nation forward, from ashes to balance. In another corner of the museum, a group of engineering students sketch the Garand's mechanism. One young man notices Endo watching and bows politely. "Sir," he says, Were you one of the engineers who studied these after the war? Endo smiles faintly. I was one who learned, he replies. That is enough. Outside, the sun sets over the skyline, glinting on glass towers and factory chimneys. The sound of trains blends with the hum of electric lines. A new kind of machinery, one born not from conquest, but creation. The camera follows Endo as he walks down the museum steps, his cane tapping lightly on the pavement. In his pocket, he carries a small steel bolt, polished smooth from years of turning it in his hand. He pauses at the gate, takes it out, and holds it up to the fading light. When you design for calm hands, he murmurs, echoing the words of his old mentor, you design peace. The bolt catches the final ray of sunlight, a spark, small but enduring. In every age, there are two kinds of strength, the one that conquers and the one that endures. This story belongs to the second. The camera fades to black, leaving only the quiet click of metal, the sound that once began a war, now ending in peace. History often remembers the thunder, the explosions, the banners, the speeches of victory. But what truly changes humanity are the quiet moments after, when the defeated learn not to hate, but to understand. The story of the Japanese mechanics and the American bolt is not about weapons. It is about awakening. A simple piece of steel became a bridge between precision and humility, between arrogance and endurance, between war and the wisdom that follows it. Masaru Endo and his comrades returned home carrying no flags, no medals, only the memory of something small and unbreakable. In their hands, engineering ceased to be a tool of destruction and became a philosophy of life. Do only what must be done, and do it well enough to last. From those lessons, Japan's post-war rebirth was forged, in factories that prized reliability over pride, and in classrooms where failure was no longer shame, but study. Decades later, every quiet motion of a lathe, every balanced gear turning in rhythm, carries an echo of that revelation. The bolt still clicks somewhere in the hands of an old man or a young apprentice. And each click asks the same silent question. Will we keep building for conquest, or will we finally build for peace? End of script. Good night.